So I'm doing some research for an upcoming episode of the Real Recovery Podcast, and it's on a subject that I'm certainly no stranger to, grief. I'm reading this really phenomenal book. The book is called Recovering from Losses in Life, and it's by H. Norman Wright, grief and trauma counselor. Have you ever struggled with something and, it's pervasive, but maybe like a little bit of you still feels every now and again that, man, that was a lot to go through, or like that's still kind of a lot if I think about it or if I let it take up space in my dome. But then you just keep going, right? And then sometimes you come across something and it's like you feel seen. I'm going to read it because my husband's asleep and I don't want to wake him up and tell him this because that's the kind of wife I am. Like every time I'm like, oh my God, I have to tell somebody something. It's my husband. I have to go wake him up and tell him. And not for nothing, but when you've been a wife or a spouse, probably a wife, long enough, you learn to relish those hours right after your kids fall asleep, right after your husband falls asleep, and you've taken care of all of them for the night, and then it's just you. And sure, you sacrifice feeling awake and refreshed in the morning, but you have your peace. I mean, my kids and my husband are great, but so am I. And I really like to have time with myself. Like, are any of you like that? Like, you just like time with yourself? Like, you prefer to recharge alone? This part of the book is talking about unresolved grief. I was, however, taken aback because it sort of stops there with the explanations of grief. They go over abbreviated grief. They go over continued grief. They go over displacement of grief. But they never mention complex grief. Complex grief it's a thing. It's a big thing. It feels like it never really gets resolved, not fully. It just shapeshifts as you learn to work with it. And it doesn't have a nice, neatly well-written paragraph describing what you can expect from it and some of the symptoms of it and anecdotals for them. I think more people experience complex grief than even they're aware of. And maybe by the time they secretly wallow, it looks more like just depression instead of the grief because there's so much time and space between the two that nobody ever connects the dots because no one ever really asked or took notice. And unfortunately, it isn't until something really tragic happens or something really extreme happens that everyone rallies around and is like, oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you talk about it? The deeply bereaved who are experiencing complex grief are not stupid. We're sad, but we're not stupid. And we understand that people don't want to even approach us. It's because what is it going to be? Is it, even if we don't say anything about what we're upset about, it's like,